Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, yo, I'm Jovan Buha, NBA reporter for Buha's Block, and welcome to another live show. The Lakers fell 107-91 to the San Antonio Spurs to drop to 23-12 on the season. They had technically fallen to number 5, but with Houston losing by 1 in Portland tonight, they actually just jumped back up to number 4. So dropped from number 3 to number 4. It was not on the bingo card that Denver would beat Boston in Boston and Houston would lose to Portland in Portland, but that just shows you the state of the West right now. Teams are constantly fluctuating and jockeying for position, but San Antonio gets a bit of a lead on the rest of the West for the number 2 spot. LA right now, again, is at number 4, jumbled in between Denver and Houston. But Lakers fall tonight with no LeBron James, who was a late scratch due to both arthritis in his foot and the sciatica injury that he's been dealing with all season. Austin, of course, continues to be out. Rui continues to be out, though he did get a limited practice in with South Bay today. But that, to me, was the story of the game for the Lakers. This is not the stat of the night, but LA had a 90.5 offensive rating tonight, and that was reflected in part in them only scoring 91 points. This is a team that walks into 110, 115 points any given night. So for them to really struggle to this degree, shooting 40% overall and 23% on threes and 64% on free throws, like those three numbers were all subpar, all below their norms, all below the numbers they needed to shoot tonight against San Antonio. So despite a brilliant performance from Luka Doncic, who had a 38-point triple-double, 38, 10, and 10, 3 steals, 7 turnovers, a really efficient night from a shooting perspective, 13 of 26 from the floor, despite Luka doing his best to carry this team and put them on his back on the second night of a back-to-back. The Lakers end up losing. They lost all 4 quarters, did not score more than 25 in a quarter. So just a rough game for LA, but considering who was out, the fact that it was the second night of a back-to-back, though it is worth noting that it was also the second night of a back-to-back for San Antonio as well. LA put up a valiant effort. There are no moral victories for a contending team, so we're not going to chalk this up as a moral victory. But certainly, I think some progress for LA against a more athletic, quicker, speedy, physical team. I thought they showed some progress, and that'll be one of the things I touch on when we get into it. But you guys know the drill. Before we get started, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. Shout out to the Late Night Gang. Shout out to the chat. Appreciate you all tuning in. Couple things quickly. Number 1, your boy's still going through it. So yesterday I said I was going to try to stick to an hour, and I went an hour 40. Tonight I'm going to try and stick to an hour because it was a loss, because it's the second night of a back-to-back. Got Lakers Collective in the morning. So I'm going to try to stick to an hour, but knowing me, I will likely go a little bit over. And then I got my first sample here with Buha's Block merch. This is just the simple word mark, but testing this out, and I'm going to test out a couple other shirts just to see quality and what type of fit I like in terms of the merch I want to sell. But wanted to update you guys that the merch process is starting, and I'm really excited about that. But shout out to everybody, and J-Note with the Flames, Cage Britt, J-Note says tough, Chuck Dangler says fire. Yeah, appreciate it, you guys. Yeah, looking forward to that. To sizzle. All right, let's get into the game, and then let's just rattle through it, and let's get into the Q&A. So Buha's big picture is, what did we learn? Because this was a topic that we talked about on Lakers Collective today in terms of, okay, LA's been playing better. They beat Sacramento. They beat Memphis a couple times. They beat New Orleans. They've won 4 of 5. The one loss was an emphatic one to Detroit. But okay, like they're playing a little bit better after that December malaise, what can we take away from this? What can they actually apply to a stellar opponent, right? Like San Antonio's at worst a top 5 team, if not even potentially a top 3 team in the NBA right now. And what I was most impressed with tonight was it did not feel like the Lakers were overwhelmed physically tonight in the same way that they were a month ago by San Antonio, or even more recently, Houston and Detroit. Now, they were certainly limited without LeBron, Austin, and Rui. They didn't have the normal weaponry offensively that they are accustomed to. And when you're playing guys like Dalton Connect and Maxi Kleba and Nick Smith Jr. in this matchup, yes, they're going to be like some of the bench groups did look physically overwhelmed, and some of the bench groups look like they cannot hang. And that's because those guys should not be playing in this matchup. Those guys should not be playing against this caliber of opponent. So the Lakers were certainly shorthanded, and there were some rough parts, to be clear, but the collective fight and resolve and just spirit of this group, I thought was really encouraging tonight. And again, they had a lot of self-inflicted wounds with the turnovers, just missing open shots, some of the fouling, but they also were flying around defensively. And I thought particularly when you saw Vando, Marcus, and Jake out there together, you saw them walling off a lot of the paint and forcing San Antonio into late shot clock situations and forcing San Antonio into contested jumpers. And sometimes they burned the Lakers with offensive rebounds, or they're able to draw a foul or something. But I thought there was a lot defensively that I really liked. Like for the game, LA had a 106 defensive rating, which you take 10 out of 10 times, that would be equivalent to the second best defensive rating of any team in the NBA right now, just behind OKC. So you take that. So like I thought it was a really impressive defensive performance, and probably LA's best defensive performance against this type of team. I can't remember what, like maybe of the season in terms of like this caliber of opponent. Because I would put San Antonio earlier in the season. They played them a couple times with the crunch time win and then the blowout loss. Detroit was obviously a blowout loss. Houston was a blowout loss. OKC was a blowout loss. So unless you want to maybe go back to like the beginning of the season and reference Minnesota, I don't have Minnesota quite on the same level as some of those teams. Against like this caliber of opponent, I thought this was far and away their best defensive performance. And I thought that was something that was encouraging in terms of, I think there was a question of, can they even defend at a certain level against this type of team? And I thought we saw, yes, they can. The other part, of course, was how great Luka looked. And it was not his like best game of the season. It was not his most efficient in the sense of 2 for 9 on threes, missed 6 free throws, just 10 of 16 at the free throw line, and did have the 7 turnovers. But I thought Luka carried the Lakers in a way that he hasn't necessarily had to, going back to earlier in the season, but also in like just doing it against like this caliber of defense. That the Spurs are one of the best defenses in the NBA, and that combination of Wemby and Cornette as rim protectors, and then just an army of wings and guards defensively with Castle and Fox and Champagnie and Johnson and Sohan and Carter Bryant and Dylan Harper. Like the Spurs might have, outside of OKC, they might have the deepest perimeter group defensively in the league. And being able, like Stephon Castle picks up 5 fouls. All right, we're going to put Sohan on Luka, right? Or you're going to have, I think, Champagnie's defended Luka reasonably well this season. Based on like on paper, that would seem like more of a mismatch. I think he's done okay against him. Or you could put a Keldon Johnson. Like they have so many perimeter guys to put on Luka or Austin or LeBron, that not having LeBron and Austin in that so concentrated against Luka, the fact that Luka was still able to do what he did, like 14 of LA's 16 field goals in the first half directly came from Luka, either scoring or passing. Like he carried the offense in the first half, and then wasn't able to do as much in the second half. But Jake stepped up, and that was really it. Like LA just did not have enough collectively from the rest of the group ultimately. But I was really just impressed with, like, second night of a back-to-back, shorthanded. This group could have easily rolled over multiple times in this game. And to the point I made earlier, I'm not here to say, hey, this is a moral victory or Lakers should pat themselves on the back. But this opponent archetype has been a difficult one for LA. And yes, they lost this game by 16, but it was a 10-point game with a few minutes left. They were right there. They had a couple opportunities. Luka drives, misses a little runner that he was making all game. And he's like a 60% shooter on that. Jake, Lakers get an offensive rebound, kick it out to Jake, or it might've been a quick turnover, kick it out to Jake. He misses a wide open wing three wide open three on the right wing. It's like that was a bang bang sequence of all of a sudden LA could have been down 8 or LA could have been down 7 with some momentum, and now it's more of a game. But that's just not how it went tonight. They missed a bunch of open looks, had a bunch of egregious turnovers, had a bunch of egregious fouls, and that was ultimately the difference. But I do think we saw some things, especially with the Banshees, some of the defensive guys making a real impact defensively. Now, offensively, it's a different story, and I will touch on that in one of my takeaways. But I like the overall approach from the group tonight. It was a valiant effort. They did not have the horses to win this race, but they still gave it a valiant fight. And I thought they held their own as best they could, and that, like, you give a hat tip to San Antonio for ultimately prevailing. Then notable performers. I mean, I mentioned Luka. I'm going to touch on him with one of my takeaways, so I don't want to spoil that. But 38, 10 and 10, 3 steals, 13 and 26 shooting, 7 turnovers, 10 for 16 at the free throw line. Then, honestly, it gets pretty grim outside of that. You have Jake LaRavia, 16 points, 7 rebounds, 6 of 13 shooting, 4 for 9 on threes. Had a much bigger second half than first half. I don't even think he had. I don't remember how many he might have had, like 4 off the top of my head, 4 or 6 in the first half, and then hit some shots in the second half. But one of the wild stats from tonight was, outside of Luka, the only Laker, and LA emptied the clip tonight in terms of, I mean, they went 10 deep with the primary rotation, and then they ended up playing the back end guys in garbage time. But with the 10 players that played, everyone that played rotation minutes attempted at least 3 shots, which is a little surprising, but that's how it went. And only 2 players shot 50% or better: Luka and Jackson Hayes. Jackson Hayes went 4 for 4. Every other Lakers player, all the other 8 rotation guys, all shot below 50%, and really it was by a lot. Like Vando, 2 for 6, DA 4 for 9, Marcus 1 for 6, Maxey 0 for 3, Dalton 1 for 6, Gabe 2 for 8, Nick Smith 1 for 4. Like, nobody could hit a shot. So offensively, there was really like nothing to point out. But Jake, I thought, like, the rebounding was big. He was a nuisance on the offensive glass for San Antonio, and they have good rebounding wings in Champagny and Keldon Johnson and Castle, and like they have guys that will compete on the glass. And I thought Jake gave them a taste of their own medicine with some of his offensive rebounding and cutting and just being a nuisance in the paint. So another solid performance from Jake, and I think another reference point for him as a, potentially remaining the starter. I thought defensively he was better tonight after what I thought was a somewhat of a rough performance against New Orleans. Like, he was on Fox for a while. He was on Castle. He was on Harper. Lakers switched so much that he got a shot at most of the perimeter guys. But I thought he held his own for the most part. Like, I actually thought that the guy who gave him the most trouble was Keldon Johnson, who dropped 27 off the bench. And he was just cooking everybody off the dribble, just bully balling, mismatch hunting. But I actually thought Laravia held up fine against most of the guards. And then that it gets grim after this, because I'll say DeAndre Ayton, I was really disappointed with DeAndre Ayton. I think this was another no-show performance in a big matchup. I talked about that after the Detroit game. If you look at most of the Lakers' big matchups this season, he has been pretty disappointing outside of the first San Antonio matchup. It's just like this is becoming an alarming trend that I think the Lakers and DeAndre are going to have to figure out. If there was ever a game that the Lakers could have fed him 15, 16, 17 times and had the Phoenix version of DeAndre Ayton and been like, yo, can you go get us 20, 25 points? This would have been that game. Instead, he has 9 points on 4 for 9 shooting, 1 for 2 at the free throw line, 6 rebounds. Jackson Hayes had more points and rebounds than DeAndre Ayton in 11 fewer minutes. Just not a good performance from DeAndre. Thought he had some good moments defensively, switching on to some of their perimeter players and corralling them, but I thought he was thoroughly outplayed by Wemby and Luke Cornett collectively, and just in general was not a high effort game from him. And I thought that was pretty disappointing. Just kind of another game where he disappeared when LA needed him. Then Vando had like the worst start to a game I can remember a player having. He has a turnover on the first possession of the game, and you see JJ's about to blow a gasket with how, because LA always has one action that they go to, like it's different every game, but JJ will always draw up a specific action for LA to start a game with. It's always in a choreographed play, and Vando immediately turns the ball over. He gets 2 fouls, and he also gives up an offensive rebound. And then there's another play that's like technically not a turnover off him, but it was like he runs out and then doesn't catch the pass. It was a bad pass in transition, but gets pulled immediately 2 minutes into the game. Then has another rough possession where again, for some reason, I swore he had like 3 turnovers. I don't know why they only gave him 1. Another situation to start the third quarter where he turns the ball over, or there's a pass going to him that he doesn't collect that gets stolen. So a pretty rough Vando performance. He only played, like we had just talked about last night, 9 straight games, 20 plus minutes for him. 19 minutes tonight, in part because of the foul trouble with 3, but didn't grab a single rebound. Like that is an alarming thing that stands out with Vando of, 2 for 6 shooting, 0 for 3 on threes, didn't grab a rebound. I thought did have some good defensive moments, playing passing lanes, deflections, and just doing Vando things. But the offense has regressed. I think the last few games, he's like 1 for 11 on threes. And I will say he had the sequence where he drove and scored, and then I think that there was a steal or a turnover, and then he got another basket, and it was like a bang sequence where he scored a couple times at the rim. So it's like the finishing has been better recently with Vando, but now the shot is starting to not fall again with him. So he's got to figure out a better way to put those two together. And then Marcus, 1 for 6 shooting. He called his own number. I think LA was down maybe 8, and he was like, yeah, let me be the hero here and take a pull-up 3, and he airballs it. And so he went 0 for 3 on threes, 7 rebounds, an assist, 3 steals, but 4 turnovers. So a 4-to-1 turnover to assist ratio, that's not going to cut it. A little bit too much Marcus tonight in a bad way. Then off the bench, like Maxi Kleba, some rough minutes from him. Like he was physical with Wemby. I will give him that, but this is just not the right matchup for him. Dalton, So the positive with Dalton is he took a second charge and he had a nice lob finish from Luka in transition early. The bad with Dalton, he went 0 for 5 on threes, and a lot of them were pretty open, like good looks. He also had 3 turnovers, and after one of them, JJ was fuming, and after he botched another action where he was not in the right place offensively in terms of remembering a play that led to a turnover, and JJ let him hear it. So it's like I just think Dalton has really wasted this opportunity here to. Like JJ said, he was going to give him a shot in the rotation, and I don't like. Again, you could pick out moments where okay, he finishes a lob, he takes a charge, but largely he was targeted defensively. He was beaten off the dribble repeatedly. He again 3 turnovers, like more turnovers than field goals for Dalton should never happen, and that is what happened tonight. So. Another, I think, just overall disappointing performance from Dalton. Jackson, I thought, like the 3 bright spots for me tonight were Luka, Jake, and Jackson. I thought Jackson was awesome. 10 points, 7 rebounds, 4 for 4, including scoring over Wemby a couple times. I mean, he had that incredible reverse dunk that Luke. I mean, the pass was incredible. The dunk was even more incredible, and that was directly over Wemby. You know, Jackson was behind him, but the pass was through Wemby to Jackson for the reverse. So I just another, like Jackson's been playing really solid lately. And I think for what it's worth, I think he's been the Lakers' best center for the last 4 or 5 games. And then Gabe came back and did Gabe things. It was better than Nick Smith Jr. and it was better than Dalton, but not by much. Gabe hit a couple threes, but went 2 for 8 overall, 2 for 7 on threes, 2 rebounds, 2 assists. He was targeted, and I don't, for the life of me, I will never understand LA's switching with their point guards that are tiny. Like there was one play where they switched Nick Smith onto Wemby, and part of this I will put on DeAndre Ayton as the closest defender. And I'm forgetting who the other, it might have been Maxey. I think it was Maxey and DeAndre were both out there. And Maxey was the primary guy, but they ran an action to get Nick Smith Jr. switched on to Wemby. Neither player helps. And instead, Wemby just armbars Nick Smith Jr. and puts the ball in. And it's like, well, yeah, he's got nearly foot and a half advantage over Nick Smith Jr. Maybe don't switch that action. Then there were several times where they were just going at Gabe and just shooting over him or powering through him. And he picked up a couple fouls in those instances. But it's like the Lakers' insistence on allowing teams to mismatch hunt their tiny guards and not having some sort of scram switching or pre-switching or help scenarios in those situations continues to not make any sense, in my opinion. But yeah, Gabe was targeted a lot. It was just a vintage Gabe Vincent performance of like better than Dalton Connect and Nick Smith Jr., but the bar is not very high in that regard. In terms of stat of the night, Non-Luka Lakers went 21 for 60, aka 35%. So again, Luka shot 50%, Jackson shot 100%. Jake and DA were right there under 50%. But overall, the non-Luka Lakers shot 35%, and that's just not going to cut it against this caliber of opponent. Then takeaway number 1 for me was Luka's MVP level brilliance. Like I just thought this was an incredible performance from Luka. With LA being so shorthanded and with it being so obvious that LA was going to have to rely on Luka every single possession down, like the entire offense was basically Luka pick and roll and see if they could create some sort of advantage. And even then, you had San Antonio trapping him in the backcourt on some possessions because of the groove he was in. And yes, Wemby got him on that one block. That was an incredible block from Wemby. His like as Luka's launching the ball up, Wemby's arm is down. That just shows you how insane Wemby is. Wemby raises his arm up and then jumps up, and during that process is able to block it against the backboard. But I just wanted to give Luka his flowers off of tonight in terms of I thought he his disposition was great. I thought he had the right mentality. And, the 38 points are his most points since December 18th against Utah. And if we're really judging it by like caliber of defense, I would say it's probably, it's one of his better scoring performances of the season when factoring in the opponent and when factoring in the caliber of defense, right? Because, okay, he's got 45 against Utah. I guess you could throw in the 43 against the Clippers. He's got plenty of 30-point performances, but let's just say among like that 35 and up club, 37 against Utah, 41 against Milwaukee, 38 against Charlotte. And then he had the start to the season, 43 Golden State, 49 Minnesota. I mean, maybe going back to like 43 versus Golden State, 49 versus Minnesota. But against like this caliber of opponent, if we look at the Detroit game, if we look at the Houston game, if we look at the last San Antonio game, Luka had not, I think, been at this level offensively. And so I thought it was even more impressive in a way to do it in this context of the entire offense is Luka in this scenario because there's no Austin, because there's no LeBron. And despite San Antonio knowing what was coming on seemingly every possession, they could not stop him. And he got Stephon Castle in foul trouble, and he got Jeremy Sohan in foul trouble. Like those two guys were the primary guys. They combined for 8 fouls. And like I just thought this was a brilliant Luka performance. In my opinion, again, based on the caliber of opponent and his overall offensive output, I thought this was his best game offensively in quite some time. And then I also thought defensively he was solid and bought into what LA was doing. So like without that type of performance from Luka, I think this is easily like a 20-point blowout, and this game's not close. The fact that it was a 5-point game at halftime, that was a complete testament to Luka putting LA's offense on his back and carrying them, again, with the, I believe, 22 points and 7 assists in the first half. Then takeaway number 2 is the state of the center spot. And this is why I bring up DA again. Just another disappointing performance against a top tier team. And this has become a concerning trend with him that I think if you're the Lakers, like the 3-and-D position is the clear need still. And that better fitting 2-way fifth starter type who can slot Marcus and Rui and Jake as bench players, where I think all 3 of them, like we talk about those 3 as the competition for the 5th spot, but that's just given the Lakers makeup. I think ideally all 3 of those guys are bench players, but with the Lakers roster, that's not the reality. But like that is clearly the number one need. But I'm starting to wonder if like the center spot is more of a need than maybe we're discussing, and not just like another backup option. But I want to see some better performances in the next month or so from DA against better competition. They're not really playing better competition for a while, so he's not really going to get to prove himself again for a bit. I mean, Milwaukee will be an interesting one with Giannis and Miles Turner, and like they're trying to make a push to ascend up the East standings. Then Toronto in the middle of the month, Denver, but Jokic probably won't be back. Dallas will be a test later in the month, Cleveland, and then we get into New York and Philly, New York right before the trade deadline. But like, I want to see some better performances from DeAndre Ayton, because right now I do not have a lot of confidence in DeAndre Ayton in these specific big matchups. And it feels like, it just sometimes feels like the moment's a little bit too big for him, or the game's moving a little bit too fast, or it's a little too physical, and he's just sort of getting lost in the shuffle of things. And like he again, I talked about it coming off the Detroit game, but a lot of his big performances have been against lottery level teams. And that's been a lot of his averages. And he's had the Spurs game where I thought he overall outplayed Wemby in the first matchup. He's had a couple of the Suns games, but it's just, it's not, he does not have a lot of impressive showings on his ledger this season in terms of against like good opponents. So that's an area that like the Lakers have to figure out, because on paper, you could look at the season stats, you could look at this, you could look at that and be like, hey, they solved the center spot. You know, they're in a much better position than they were last year. But honestly, in some of these games, I felt more comfortable with Jackson Hayes out there. And that's how I felt tonight. Jackson Hayes straight up outplayed him. I thought they should have closed with him over DA again, similar to the first Memphis game. I think Jackson's been straight up better the last week and a half or so. And that's partly a kudos to Jackson, partly on DA to play better. But him continuing to struggle in these games is, I think, a concerning trend that like we're still looking to see like who are the guys LA can really trust, who are the guys that you know are going to show up in the big moments. And I think that's the big three. I think Jake is starting to build some of those performances. Marcus has been up and down, but had some of those performances. I think DA like needs to be better in these types of games. And if he cannot be better in the next month or so, that's where I think LA has to consider potentially upgrading that spot. And then third and final takeaway before we get into the Q&A is the roadmap ahead. And what I mean by this is I think one of the biggest lessons, if not arguably the biggest lesson of this recent stretch where Austin and Rui have both been out, is we've seen LA shift toward the Banshee defender style, lineups and rotation, and Marcus playing more, Jake playing more, Vando playing more, and LA leaning more into the defensive side of things. And there have been some real positives with that, where I think the general effort and motor and defense with the group has been better, and understandably so, like predictably so. When you play your best defenders, you're going to defend at a certain level. The flip side has been LA has been a terrible shooting team over this stretch, and some of it you could chalk up to shot variance or regression or shot luck, whatever. But the fact of the matter is LA's best defenders are unreliable shooters, and if you're holding your breath out on Marcus Smart or Jared Vanderbilt making a certain amount of open threes, I think you're probably going to pass out from that decision. Jake is the one guy who I still think like has some untapped potential as a shooter and has been shooting the ball better recently as a starter, but he also can go through his lulls, as we saw last night in New Orleans and at various points of the season. So point being, I think we've sort of seen that. I think with LA's offensive firepower, with the big three and two finishing centers, if you can put the right wing talent in terms of defenders, athletes, a certain amount of speed and athleticism, they can defend at a certain level and do the little things to help prop up the stars and the offense. But they do need a baseline level of offensive competence and shooting competence that I don't think this group currently has. And that's where, again, we come back to the 3-and-D conversation of if you can get another player who defends at a similar level to a Smart or a Vando, but is much closer to a Rui as a shooter, or not even necessarily at that level, but is like more stable than Jake as a shooter, that type of player. And even if you could get a couple of those types of players, that I think would go a long way in balancing out the roster right now. Because I think the thing LA is going to have to figure out is the defense has been better lately, but the offense has taken a hit in part because outside of Luka and LeBron and Austin, no one can score consistently right now. Not Jake. Rui's been out for a bit, but like no one else in the rotation you can really trust offensively right now. But you have a certain baseline with defense. But once you get Austin back, once you get Rui back, and have LeBron, for pretty much every game, you're going to have a higher offensive ceiling and floor, But when you start shifting back to the offensive-minded lineups and groups, your defense is going to take a hit. So LA has to find the proper balance between offense and defense with the lineups. But I think part of that is going to ultimately come in the form of making some sort of trade to just balance this out. Because I think we've seen if you put the Banshees, if you put the motor players there, they can have success, but they are sort of reliant on those guys making shots. And the current guys on this roster, I just don't think you can confidently say they're going to make enough shots to make a team pay like 4 times in a 7-game series. Maybe 1 game, maybe 2 games. They just don't have the shooters. So I think the key for LA moving forward is going to be finding those defense motor players who can also shoot. Much easier said than done. And that's why the 3-and-D market, there's a premium for that type of player. But I think we have been able to see, hey, if they did trade for this type of player, what would this look like? And it's like, it would look pretty good if they're defending at the same level, but also if they're making threes and more of an offensive threat. Like when Jake was able to attack off the weak side against Memphis, that just put so much pressure on Memphis's defense, especially playing off of LeBron and Luka. So having a couple more guys like that, I think would just go such a long way in ultimately breaking opponents' defenses and also keeping up this balance with the offense and defense lineups with the starters and the bench, etc. So I think that should be the roadmap ahead for LA over the next month in terms of the trade market. But with all that said, let's get into the Q&A here. First one from Luis. Any concern? Thank you for the super chat. Any concern with Bronny's lack of playing time, considering our lack of health and defense? He's raw but balanced. Do you believe he can lend a hand? I would not say concerned. I think he is raw, and I think he's had some flashes, but ultimately, I do think there's a gap between Bronny and Dalton and Nick Smith. And I don't really, in some of these recent games, I don't really see a situation in which it would have made sense to play Bronny. Like looking at tonight, for example, I would rather play Gabe than Bronny. I would ideally not play Dalton Connect or Nick Smith Jr., but just based on who was out there, they felt the need to. So I get that to a degree, but I don't think as things stand, he is currently a rotation level player or a player who can really help out. I know he had, like, I think about the Portland game earlier in the season where he did help LA compete in that game, but I still think that there's just a level offensively he hasn't quite gotten to, and then also hasn't gotten to defensively in terms of, you know, if you're not, like, if you're a guard, right? Typically guard. I mean, if you're going to play as this undersized guard, you either have to be like a Davion Mitchell lights out defender guarding 94 feet, or you need to be a caretaker running the show, sort of like a Trey Jones type off the bench. And I think he has grown as a playmaker, but I don't think he is I don't think I'm comfortable with him running the offense, especially against a team like the Spurs. And then also defensively, I think there's been some strides, but he's also, I don't think the motor is quite where you want it to be in that regard as well. So I still think he, to your point, is raw and needs more time in the G League to fully develop. Chuck Dangler, thank you for the super chat. This loss is an effort loss. Too many guys missing. We'll have to take it for the merch. How will you manage to get it overseas? It's fire. Congrats. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I'm going to be hosting it on a site called Fourth Wall. I'm still figuring out what the shipping situation is, but I believe they do international shipping. So I think hopefully it will be able to ship to you. But I will have more of an update on that as we get closer to launching the merch, but appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, I do not, this is not like this isn't a different class of loss for me. Like this is more similar to the Boston loss, but even different than the Boston loss, because even with how shorthanded they were in the Boston loss, I didn't like how they came out in the first quarter. I didn't like the effort defensively. I didn't like the spirit with the group early. They managed to rally and make it more of a game later, but this is different because like from the jump, I thought LA was in the game. They just couldn't make shots, honestly, and had too many untimely turnovers, too many rough fouls, and just couldn't contain the ball to a degree. But that I don't consider this a bad loss. Like I think it was in part the schedule, 4 games in 6 days, second night of a back-to-back on the road, really tough opponent, and also without 3 starters. Harry Chinani, thank you for the super chat. Jackson's been more steady than DA. He deserves a few more minutes. Luka needs to be better with turnovers, free throws, and threes. If he shoots a higher arc, he'll be a better shooter. Agreed across the board here. I think Jackson has been steadier than DA, which is kind of funny because like you don't associate steadiness with Jackson, but he has become a pretty steady player, and that's been really a multi-year development. I thought Jackson, the second half of the 2023-24 season, the final year of Darvin, he had a really nice close to that season. I think like the January to April stretch. Then last year was a bit more up and down to start the year. Then remember he got injured. He missed like a month. Then he came back. I thought he was a little rough. And there was even a stretch there where I was advocating for Koloko over Jackson. Then all of a sudden he just popped and was playing some great basketball. AD goes down. He steps up as the starter, and then he's the starter the rest of the way. And didn't have a good playoff series against Minnesota, but he's not a starting center. Like he shouldn't be in that position to begin with. That's a roster construction issue. In terms of Luka, yeah, I mean, I think part of it tonight, I will say, and not every night, because he obviously can struggle with any of these things on a given night, and often struggles with 2 of these 3 things. But particularly, I mean, definitely like the threes have been a struggle for quite a while this season. And then the turnovers and free throws can fluctuate depending on the game. But I thought there was certainly a fatigue element, and he took a couple shots on drives, and there was times he looked either a little gassed or just didn't have his legs or whatever. So I thought he pushed through that ultimately and still had an efficient game. Like if we break down the shooting there, 13 to 26, 2 for 9 on threes. That meant he went 11 for 15 inside the arc. And I think that's my one thing with him that I think can be sharpened a little bit, is like he's just so efficient inside the arc and so tough to defend. And that's 11 for 15 and not even including the fouls he drew, which he once at the free throw line, attempted 16 free throws and had set, a couple of and ones at least. So he probably drew 10, 11 fouls tonight, or 10 or 11 shooting fouls on top of the 15 shots inside the arc. So that's probably like 25, 26, attempts inside the arc that he scored on most of them and or was fouled. But the 2 for 9 on threes, just with the struggles he's had from deep, it's like if he either didn't take those shots or just converted those to twos, 2 or 3 of those, I just think it would make such a difference in his efficiency, because if you go through it, he has too many 2 for 9, 1 for 7, 3 for 11, 3 for 8, 1 for 6. I just think he could be better with that. But yeah, I mean, the arc, it's interesting because he has really good arc inside the arc. But sometimes it could be a little short with like his legs or if he's fading or it's a step back or something. But I mean, we're ultimately we're nitpicking here because I thought tonight he was brilliant, and 38-point triple-double, 13 to 26 shooting. Like it's hard to complain with how he carried the offense. Mac Roblox, thank you for the super chat. Any update on Lakers trades? How likely will the Lakers trade Dalton Connect for Keon Ellis? I also don't see any improvement from Dalton Connect lately. I think Dalton, look, I give him credit for the back-to-back games with charges. And I think there has been I actually think like he's been more locked in defensively and trying harder. But I also think some of the stuff is like last night was the first charge of, I believe, I don't want to misquote this, but I don't remember if it was like his professional career, which would include Summer League, G League, and NBA, or it might have been like his, I don't remember if it was like college and above, or it was just like professional and above. Regardless, like, I don't remember the specifics of when it was his first charge since blank, but let's just say it was his first professional charge. Like, it's nice to see, but it's also like that's a pretty bare minimum thing that you want a young athletic player to do defensively. And especially because he is limited defensively, that should theoretically be something that like he tries to add into his game. So I do want to give him credit for trying to add that, but we're already like a year and a half in, and there's been, in my opinion, minimal strides defensively. And then offensively, he's just too inconsistent of a shooter. And it's like, in general, one of my least favorite player archetypes is a shooter who can't shoot. And that is, in my viewpoint, a player who's billed as a certain caliber of shooter who does not shoot to that level. And JJ calling Dalton Connect a top 1% shooter and top 1% shooter by NBA standards, that has not materialized. He has not been close to a top 1% shooter. He's not been a top 5% shooter. I don't even know he's not been a top 10% shooter. So that has been its own thing of like, you can live with the forgetting plays or the defensive limitations if he's shooting his ass off and making shots at a really high level, but he does not do that consistently. And really the only time he does it is in garbage time, which is why I call him a garbage time all-star. But in terms of Dalton for Keon, no real updates on trades. Talking to people, like it seems like there's going to be some fallout with like the Trae Young trade tonight kicked off trade season, and now they're trying to go get AD. That could have some ripple effects with Dallas and what they end up doing. But the Lakers or other teams can try to be like a third team in one of these deals to try to facilitate it. But I think we're still not at the point of having a clearer picture of what LA is going to do. I think that's probably closer to late January. But if they could flip Dalton in a second for Keon Ellis, I'd do it in a heartbeat. I just don't think with the way Dalton's playing, that's going to be enough. Dan Howard, thank you for the super chat. Why does Ayton play good with Reeves but not Luka? What's interesting with this is like earlier in the season, I thought this was a fair criticism in terms of like Luka is more of a lob passer than a pocket passer, and Ayton is better in the short roll and as a pocket scorer and finisher. And there certainly were some struggles early on with Luka and Ayton in terms of the timing. And even now, they still will have, they will miscommunicate or there'll be mistimed lobs or entry passes or whatever that they just don't connect on to the way that I also think you could throw in LeBron here. I think LeBron and Ayton have a pretty good connection in addition to Austin and Ayton. I don't want to put, I'm not saying you're doing this, but I don't want to like put Ayton's disappointing performance tonight on Luka. I'm not going there. I do not think that is the case. I think that is firmly on Ayton. And like, there were so many little things too tonight in terms of like, just like not being able to post up against guards and not being able to seal them. I think that's an area of his game that has slipped recently. Has been he used to be able to punish mismatches and get deep seals, and it feels like smaller players are able to push him off his spot and get in front of him, and a lot of those passes are getting tipped or stolen, or they're just not even entering the ball to him because he has an established position. And that's on him. That's not on Luka. That's not on Austin. That's not on anybody. I think in general, Austin's passing style, Austin is a better pocket passer than he is lob thrower, as we've seen. Austin is due for one bad lob a game. So I think there's just a natural synergy and a natural stylistic similarity between Austin and Ayton in terms of Austin likes throwing pocket passes. Ayton likes receiving pocket passes. Luka likes throwing lobs. Jackson likes receiving lobs. So Luka and Jackson have a more natural synergy that Austin and Jackson don't have. Austin and Ayton have a more natural synergy that Ayton and Luka have had at times, but they've also gone through their rough patches. But I would say more so it's the passing styles and more of a stylistic fit there. Sarah Talks Ball, thank you for the super chat. Marcus playing more minutes may be hurting his scoring. Certainly possible that Marcus is hitting a bit of a physical wall. I thought we talked about it on Lakers Collective today. He's averaged, he's played 54 games the last 2 seasons. So that's an average of 27 games per season. He just played his 26th game of the season tonight. So he has nearly matched his output or his annual output of the 2 previous seasons. And we're not even at the halfway mark of this season. So this is the healthiest he's been in over a couple years, but this is also the biggest workload he has had to endure in the past couple of years. And that could be for when we talk about the pros and cons for each potential fifth starter and why it may or may not make sense. The obvious con for Marcus is his injury history, is his age, and if LA wants to potentially be a bit more conservative with him and maybe keep him in a certain bench role and play him fewer minutes. I think to your point though, like I wonder if it's affected his shot a little bit, right? He does have great variance with the shooting. I thought last night, obviously, shot the ball better against New Orleans. He's very hit or miss, like literally. It's so he has let's go through Marcus's recent games. 0 for 3 on threes against San Antonio, 3 for 7 against New Orleans, 0 for 3 against Memphis, 3 for 6 against Memphis, 0 for 3 against Detroit, 0 for 1 against Sacramento, 0 for 3 against Houston, 4 for 8 against Phoenix. He is pretty much one good shooting game every 2 to 3 games, and that's just part of the Marcus Smart experience. I wish we saw a little bit more tonight was the passing and the playmaking from him, because his previous 4 games, he had 4 assists, 7 assists, 5 assists, and he just tonight only 1. Like part of it was just no one made shots, but I would have liked to see a little bit more of a playmaking role from him tonight. Like Gabe, one thing I will give Gabe credit for is he did have a couple nice passes, 1 to DA for a bucket, 1 to Jackson for a bucket. Gabe will certainly call his own number. Let's make no mistake about that. But Gabe, I think will also come in and feed the bigs a little bit in a way that Marcus had been doing recently, but didn't quite do tonight. Sanjay, thank you for the super chat. What I saw tonight was a superstar surrounded by an imbalanced roster. They don't value the basketball and can't make wide open shots. I saw the same thing, and I thought, look, Lakers were without their second and third best player in whatever order you want to put those 2 guys, second and third leading scorers by a wide margin. Like this is a team that is very offensively concentrated with their top 3, and then also another starter and their 5th leading scorer in Rui, and best shooter in Rui. So they're without a lot of offensive firepower, and I think that was if you have Luka, if you have Austin and LeBron tonight, and you have Rui, I think LA probably wins. To be completely honest, and that's another thing to kind of go from what we learned. It's certainly a much more competitive game, and San Antonio did not. San Antonio made 4 threes tonight. Like, it's incredible. San Antonio won a game in which they made 4 threes. They shot 16% on threes, 49% overall. They did win the free throw battle again, and that's been one of their advantages over LA. But yeah, I agree with you, and I think this is why LA needs to make some trades coming up. Gary Singh, thank you for the super chat. Teams keep attacking Gabe on defense too small. Yes, and this is why when people bring up Malik Monk or other small guards, I'm pretty anti small guard. I think you need to probably be 6'4" to be in a true contender rotation. If you go team by team, like Houston, the only guy they're playing under that size is Reed Shepherd, who's one of the best shooters in the NBA right now. Denver, Jamal Murray's on that borderline at 6'3", 6'4". San Antonio, I guess Fox is the closest guy at about like 6'3", but everyone else is like 6'5" and above. OKC has a couple of those guys, but like, I mean, Kayson Wallace is an all defense level guy. And then everyone, Caruso's right there at 6'4", 6'5". Dort is also an all defense guy in that like 6'4" range. And then Isaiah Joe is maybe the other guy, but he's more of a fringe rotation guy for them. Really depends on the night and the matchup. So just like Minnesota, I mean, Mike Conley has been pushed out of the rotation a bit, but like point being, I just think it's really tough to play that small of a player, especially if they're not. If Gabe was shooting better or better defensively, frankly, you could justify it. But with his current performance this season, I think Gabe should be a fringe rotation guy and should be their 10th man. I think we've now had like it sort of crystallized the Lakers' 10 best players, the 10 players the coaching staff trusts. I think he should be 10th on that list. I think he might be closer to 8th maybe, but we'll see. Another one from Gary Singh. Is this Luka shooting going to be the norm or is it a bad month? I'm somewhere in between. So if you look at Luka's monthly shooting splits throughout his career, he will go through shooting lulls, and this is par for the course with him. I believe Istok Franco said that this is, I think, like the second worst shooting stretch of his career. He had another stretch in Dallas where he was, really shooting the ball, not great from three. But I mean, looking at his splits this month, he's been 35% in October, which is only 3 games, 34% in November, 29% in December, 30% in January. So I think it'll stabilize more in like the mid 30s, but I don't think it's going to be more than that. And I think at this point, he's reduced the 3-point shooting a little bit recently, but Luka is just going to take 8 to 10 threes at a minimum. It's part of his shot diet and just the way that he likes to attack and have a certain balance in terms of going downhill versus keeping a defense on its toes. So I think from that perspective, like, I think the real solution is him probably cutting his threes down to more like 5 or 6 a game, but I don't think that's realistic. So I think it is going to stabilize closer to probably like mid 30s, but yeah, he's certainly going through a rough patch right now. Nala, thank you for the super chat. With Castle's screen navigation plus Wemby's drop, spamming pick and roll doesn't create advantage. Can't beat Spurs in playoffs if Wemby chills in the paint. Really good point there. And LA did do some off-ball actions and some post-ups with Luka, which I liked. I thought when he was able to get into those pockets of the floor, he was able to get some good looks. But to this point, I mean, Castle, and I think that they have several good screen navigators. I think Champagne and Sohan, and they have different guys that can be like, this was more the style of defense that this is the style of defense that I think teams should play against Luka and LA. If you have the personnel to get around the screen or fight around it in rear view contest, and then also have the big man to keep the roller, in front of you and also contest Luka, that's probably the best way to play that. And the teams that have been able to do that, I think, have had the most success against the Lakers, namely San Antonio, Phoenix, Houston to a degree, Detroit to a degree. Those teams were also mixing in some more blitzing and trapping. But to this point, they didn't create the pick and roll advantages with the lobs. Even the lob we're referencing with Jackson was, a lob in transition. And then some of Jackson's buckets were more so flashes into the paint for little runners or floaters. Similar thing with DA. He hit a couple of jumpers. But so it's also a learning lesson for LA's offense, because I agree that they were spamming certain actions that were not necessarily conducive to beating this specific San Antonio defense. Trucker Star, thank you for the super chat. Lakers definitely need a bruising center with heart. Yeah, I think I would take a less skilled and talented offensive player for a player who is going to play with more motor and show up with a certain, if you gave DeAndre Vando's motor or Marcus's motor, just think about the physical capabilities with that frame and that size, with that mentality and mindset. That's a beast. And he has had games like that. But again, I think with some distance and actually looking back and reflecting on most of his season, most of his best performances have been against bad defensive teams and bad teams. And most of his worst performances have been against good teams, good defensive teams. And that correlation has been a bit troubling, and the Lakers need more from him in some of the bigger matchups. But I agree. I think it's hard for them to address every single need. I still think the 3-and-D wings is a bigger need, but I am growing more on board with them adding another big man. Taman, thank you for the super chat. Lakers get Monk and Keon. Sacramento gets Gabe and Maxey. Lakers take on salary, then trade Rui and DK unprotected first, and pick swap for Herb and Bay. Love the second one. I have been on record. So this is interesting because I think the question for the first one is, would Sacramento view dumping Monk as enough to not require draft compensation? Because, I mean, maybe you say Gabe, Maxey in a second for Monk and Keon, something like that. And then you do Rui and DK in the first for Herb and Bay. If you can pull off the second one, I would love that. I think based on the current asking price from New Orleans, that seems a little low for what they want, but I think that's reasonable. I think that's fair. And now there's a whole other question of does New Orleans view Herb? If I was New Orleans, and I've said this multiple times now, I would probably just keep Herb and be like, hey, we got Queen, we got Trey, we got Herb, we got Jeremiah Fears, maybe we got Zion. That starting group theoretically together has some potential. Now, defensively, I don't know if you want to hitch your wagon to a Zion, Derek Queen defensive 4-5 combo, but offensively, certainly with Queen operating in the high post as a passer, Zion as a downhill force, Trey Murphy running around screens and draining threes and attacking off of pin downs. We saw what he just did to the Lakers. They have, and then I really like Jeremiah Fears. They have a nice little young core there like relatively young core. Some of the guys are mid-20s, some of the guys are early 20s, but I believe that entire group is like 26 and under. That's a nice group there that I think with some seasoning in like a couple years could be a playoff team that is solid, depending on how they build out the rest of the bench, and maybe they add another big piece that moves one of those guys to the bench. But I just personally would not trade her, but it seems like they're open to it. So if they want to get off the money and get an unprotected first from the Lakers and a pick swap here, I think that can make some sense. My one hesitation with this deal from the Lakers side is I'm not a big Malik Monk guy, specifically with the context of we were just talking about Gabe. And for as bad as, or as much as Gabe can be picked on defensively, Gabe is multiple levels better than Malik Monk defensively. And now the difference with Monk is he's an excellent shooter. He's an elite shooter, and he would give LA some scoring punch off the bench. But I think you'd have to be really careful. Like, I don't think Monk and Austin should play together. I think that is a disastrous backcourt defense waiting to happen. And again, kind of looking at the makeup of some of these top teams, there are not a lot of Malik Monk types in the primary rotation of teams I consider a true contender, if any Malik Monk types in any of those rotations. So he's about 6'3". He's on that borderline of being a small guard. He's athletic. He can shoot. He can fill it up. But just the thought of, like, even if it's just 15 minutes a night, which I don't think it would be, but 15 minutes a night of Gabe versus 15 minutes a night of Malik Monk, there's a huge difference defensively, in my opinion. And then on top of that, he's probably not playing 15 minutes a night. He's probably playing or expecting to play 24 to 28 minutes a night. And now we're talking about fewer Marcus minutes, fewer Jake minutes, maybe fewer Vando minutes, because Vando has sort of been the guy who, when JJ needs to pull some minutes, like that's the spot he goes to. And if you're pulling minutes from the Banshees, I just don't really love that personally. Or maybe you're pulling minutes from Keon Ellis, who theoretically you're adding to be this, Herb would be the starting wing, but like Keon would be the guy off the bench that you're hoping to play a little bit more. So I like the moves overall. And like in theory, I guess you're really replacing Rui and Gabe with Monk, Keon. I mean, you're almost flipping two guys for four guys here in terms of Rui and Gabe for Monk, Keon, Herb, and Bay. You get deeper. You're adding a couple offensive guys, a couple defensive guys. So the more I talk it through, I do like it. Monk has 2 more years, and I don't like, if we project out the long-term money for LA, if the guys under contract are like Luka, Austin, Monk, LaRavia, Vando, Adu, and like those are the 6 guys under contract. I don't love that as like a starting point, especially with, if you already have Luka and Austin, I don't think you necessarily need a Monk type. That's my opinion. Gary Singh, Herb is not the answer. Couldn't make a shot versus us. Thank you for super chat. My one pushback here would just be, I don't think it's fair to simply view a guy through the lens of like one performance. Back in the day when I was covering the Doc Rivers Clippers, Doc was infamous for, if you had a good game against Doc, he would go and try to sign you the next offseason. And it would be like, you could have had a bad season. You could have been bad against the other 80 games of the season. But if you had a good game or two against the Clippers, he was going to try to sign you. And so like, that's the opposite end of this, of overvaluing a player's performance against your team. I don't think you should do the opposite of undervaluing it. Now, he went 5 for 24, I think, or 5 for 23 in the 2 games against the Lakers. Not going to cut it. I believe was something like 2 for 15 or so on threes, 1 for 15 on threes. Not going to cut it. But I thought he was solid defensively, and I still think he gives a certain defensive, like I think he's a better defender than Jake. I think he's a better defender than Marcus. I think peak Vando, you could argue, is at their similar levels, but I think Herb is a guy who could play 30 plus minutes more consistently than Vando can play 30 plus minutes. Teams respect his shot more than Vando's shot. So I still really like Herb, but I've become more okay if LA just can't land him, they can't land him. Like it is what it is. Hey, Chinani, thank you for the super chat. LAL, Luka, AR, LBJ haven't played much this season. I'm just worried there won't be much time for them to gel by the time AR comes back. Really good point. They've only played in 8 games. LA is 5-3 in the 8 games they've played. This is a concern. This was also the concern at the start of the year. Like the one of the big things I pointed out when we found out that LeBron was going to miss some time was like just a missed opportunity of reps, and reps in training camp, reps in the preseason, reps to start the season. You don't get that back. Like there is a finite amount of time in the season, and LA's almost at the 50% point of the season. And I mean, realistically, they're going to hit the 40 game mark or the 41 game mark, and their big three is going to have played in 8 of those games together. And we just don't have a great sense of what this group can be at full strength. Like I think we have ideas, right? We have the general, like we have the reference points, as JJ likes to say, of, okay, Luka's playing like a first team All NBA guy. LeBron and Austin are playing at all-star levels. LA's offense has been top 7, top 8. The defense has been bottom 10. That's kind of putting it kindly, but we'll say bottom 10. And, they've beaten basically all the mediocre to bad teams they played, and they're below 500 against the good teams they played. And all their losses are by double figures. They also have a bunch of close crunch time wins. So they get in these close games, they out execute their opponents, but they also get punched in the mouth and aren't able to overcome that deficit. Like we have some reference points on the season, but we still don't know, right? And I think tonight is a perfect example of how they played. I truly think if they had Austin and LeBron, they probably win this game. And that's frustrating. That would have been a huge win for them. Second night of a back-to-back in San Antonio, beating the Spurs, taking the number 2 seed. Like that's a huge potential momentum swing there. So yeah, it's frustrating, but there's nothing they can do about it. Arnold, thank you for the super chat. Great trade for Lakers, sets the market. I assume you're talking about Trey here, but great trade for the Lakers, sets the market that expiring contracts are value, expiring contracts, assets. Trey, no picks, and Wiggins is a pick with expiring. Market has been set. It's a good perspective here. Now, the market could always be reset. It just takes one team to mess it up and then kind of shock the market. But to your point, yeah, I think this was a positive that if based on the expirings that, we're in this trade and just sort of the nature of it with what Trey went for and how low that was, I think that is a net positive for the Lakers. I agree. For the record, I'm still processing what I feel about this trade. Surprise, I'm not a big Trae Young guy. I think in line with the conversation we've been having, I think it's really difficult to build a championship level team with him as your point guard. Offensively, he has never, he does have the big shots and he has the big moments and he can hit 40-foot bombs, but he's never been a Dame or Steph level shooter, despite his shot selection indicating he views himself that way. He's always been a average to below average 3-point shooter. And then turnovers are really high with his high usage. And he's one of the worst defensive guards in the league. I really think in the conversation for worst defenders in the league, period, and is a huge glaring target. And like for all the people that it's like Trey and Luka have always been compared to one another. And one of the things that people will say, well, Luka, he's also turns the ball over and he's inefficient from three and he's a defensive liability. And I think none of those things to the degree of Trey, and also Luka's strengths are at a higher, like he's a better scorer than Trey. I think he's a better passer. And like, so that's its own better rebounder, whatever. But the biggest difference between these two is also the biggest difference between these two, which is one dude is 6'7", 6'8", one dude is 6'1". And for whatever physical limitations Luka might have, being 6'8" or 6'7" matters at the NBA level. He's an above average player by NBA standards in terms of size. Trae Young is one of the smallest players in the league. So that it's just a limiting factor. And so I know he had the 2021 run, but for Washington, I guess it's like, hey, I don't think he's good enough to accelerate their rebuild. So it's not like he's going to make them a play-in team or anything. So I guess you get your core, some like a true playmaker lead guard. You sell some tickets. Like Trae Young is the type of player that will put butts in seats. You give the Wizards a little bit of hope, I guess, but I don't think you're really going anywhere with him as your best player. And I think he's in a situation where he has to take a real step back to being like a number 2 or maybe even number 3. Like number 2 is probably fine, but number 2 or 3. And it does not seem like he views himself in that light. On the Atlanta side, I think it was clear like they had to move on, and I mean, they sold pretty low on him, but clearly the market was like, you had Sacramento passing on Trae Young. That's a red flag. If Sacramento's not talking themselves into it, then like, I mean, at some point they had to just sell, and now they're pivoting, trying to get AD. Going to go about like 2 more minutes here. If you guys have any more questions. Paul says, Jovan, what needs to be done with this team? I think to start, it would be, well, at a minimum, I will say this. I think if I'm Rob Pelinka and it is February 5th, I don't want to say there's no chance, because it always depends on the context of the situation. I don't like talking in absolutes, but my goal would be Gabe Vincent, Maxi Kleba, and Dalton Connect should be traded, potentially in 2 different trades. But I think those 3 players make the most sense to trade. They've consistently been the 3 guys I've said are the 3 guys who I think are the most likely to be traded. And they're like, I think you could even lump Rui into that group, but I know the Lakers are reluctant to trade Rui. The Lakers are reluctant to give up on Rui. So if we view it through that lens, okay, don't trade Rui, but those 3 guys should be traded. And if you could flip those guys for 2 rotation upgrades, that to me would be a win. Especially, it depends on what else you're willing to put into the deal, but I don't see, with Maxi and Dalton, I just don't see them contributing to this team in a meaningful way. And I think Gabe could contribute in a certain role, but seems to have a little bit too much confidence from the coaching staff to a degree that I think it's sometimes detrimental. So I think if you could flip those 3 for like 1 to 2 upgrades, that to me is at least that's at least a single or double, depending on who the players are. But I think like the perfect thing might be honestly like a starting center upgrade and a starting 3-and-D wing upgrade. I just don't know if LA has the salary and assets to pull that off. But maybe if you could add a starting 3-and-D wing, another bench big who's like better than Jackson. Maybe like I'll give you like a perfect scenario here that I don't think is realistic, but I think something like Daniel Gafford, Herb Jones, and Keon Ellis. So Herb Jones slides in as the fifth starter. Daniel Gafford is good enough to just straight up replace DeAndre Ayton as a starter if you want to go that route, but could also just be the backup who maybe closes games over Ayton, especially in the games where Ayton isn't playing with a certain level of motor. But as a motivating factor, it could be like, hey, this dude's coming in here and he's taking your spot, and like, or it's like a real competition here, Ayton. Like you have to prove yourself. And then Keon Ellis as more like the bench point of attack guy at the guard spot. Like that would be a home run. Now, realistically, I don't think they might not be able to land any of those three players, but I'm more so speaking in like player archetypes of a Herb Jones, like all defense type starting wing, a Daniel Gafford type backup bench big who can push Ayton a bit, and then also a Keon Ellis, like point of attack bench guard. I think those general player archetypes would be the archetypes I would go after. That's my my read on that. Ken Carter, hey Jovan, I think Rui has to be included because with his starting stipulation, I think it becomes tough. DA struggling and himself, Rui, Gabe, Maxi, Connect have to go. I'd hit the Nets up ASAP. I'm on board with trading Rui. I just don't know how open the Lakers actually are to that, to be completely honest. Like and if they're not, I think then the second thing needs to be, okay, just like restructure his role and move him into a bench role and like actually make his role more of a meritocracy. And if he's being outplayed by Jake or Marcus, then those guys should play more. But right now, Rui's sort of grandfathered into like a 30+ minute a night starting role, which I is not working. Like the starting group with Rui next to the big three has been killed. And it's also like from just a pure performance perspective, he sort of is able to just play however he wants and like not really be affected by that. Madison says, why is no one talking about the shooting? It's almost as big of a problem as the defense. You might have missed the beginning or the first, like my breakdown from the game. I said the shooting, I had a whole takeaway on the shooting. That's a big thing here. I think that's one of their biggest issues is that, like, my point was just that we've seen what it looks like with the defenders, with the athletes, or like, you know, the athletes, the Banshees, and there's been some progress defensively, but those guys can't shoot. And LA doesn't have a high enough offensive ceiling with those guys playing a certain amount of minutes. So they need to flip those spots into better shooters. And that's where ideally you add one or two of those guys who can shoot more. Now that's a pushback against the Herb Jones. If you want to make that case against him, that's where like a Wiggins is not as good as Herb Jones defensively, but he's certainly better offensively, better shooter. Can think about the ways that Jake has been able to attack off the weak side. Andrew Wiggins could do that easily, as you know, attacking closeouts, cutting, even offensive rebounding. He's a high motor player in that regard. So yeah, I mean, I think Wiggins. I've gone back and forth between Herb and Wiggins. I've more so been on the Herb side, but I've come around maybe like with the offensive side, maybe favoring Wiggins as the best overall trade target. But otherwise, all the other names that everyone throws out, in my opinion, are all bench guys, which is fine. It's nice to improve the bench, but I think LA needs like a 30+ minute a night guy to really make a difference. Like a guy who's a starter and a closer. And right now, the only three guys I think really hit that threshold are Jones, Wiggins, and Brooks. Brooks, I don't think is available. Wiggins and Herb, asking price might be a little too high. Kane Carter says, hey, Jovan, if I'm Rob, I dig into hole in the wall guys. Ochai, Champagne, Dean Wade, Gigi Jackson, Zaire Williams, even Terrence Mann, despite his contractor types I'd go for, they can really fix this team. I agree to an extent. Of these guys, I'll say Memphis really likes Gigi Jackson, so I don't think they're just giving away Gigi Jackson for Dalton Connect in a second or some poo-poo platter offer like that. Team Man, I've talked about him. I like him. I just don't really like the contract. And I only would really consider giving, if you're getting off Vando, that's a different story. But if you're just adding him in, that's tough. I like Williams. I like Champagne. I assume you're talking about not Julian, Justin in Washington. Dean Wade. I think it's a little tough to trade with Cleveland based on some of their apron restrictions. Ochai is the guy for me that I think actually has starting potential out of this group. Everyone else I think is a bench player. Like I know people are trying to uncover like these hidden gems, and I totally understand that. And I think LA should be bargain bin hunting as well. I just think if we're being honest, like I don't, if it's game 7, like if we go through every scenario right now, game 7 against Denver, game 7 against Houston, game 7 against Minnesota, game 7 against San Antonio, game 7 against OKC, and 5 minutes left. I have a pretty good idea of who would be out there for each of those teams in terms of their 5-man lineup. And for most of them, it's their starting lineup. For, some of them, they might lean like one bench guy in for a starter, again, depending on the situation. But you have like a clear vision of who they would close with. There's a nice offense-defense balance. They have like positional balance of typically like a slightly smaller guard, multiple wings, and then either 2 bigs or like 1 big, and then, a bigger wing, medium-sized wing, smaller wing, whatever. The Lakers do not, I have no idea who's closing. Like with the way DA is playing, I don't know if I want to close with DA in some of these matchups. Who's the 5th guy? Is it Marcus? Is it Rui? Is it Jake? If it's Rui, I don't have confidence in LA winning the game 7 because that lineup has been getting killed. And then also, like you talk about the positional situation, if it's Rui, now the Lakers have a center, 3 power forwards, and a shooting guard out there. That's a problem. So my point being is just that it's sort of like when you're trying to get in better shape, there are different things that you can do, right? And you could be like, hey, I'm gonna drink more water. I'm gonna take more vitamins. I'm gonna eat more greens or whatever, right? But at the core, the way to get into better shape is going to be working out more, eating healthier, getting more sleep. Like those are probably like the 3 biggest things in terms of like the foundation of good health. And for the Lakers, I view some of these guys as like take the vitamins, drink a little bit more water, maybe like get your steps in. Like those things are nice, but I don't think it's going to transform them against the best teams in the NBA. So I'd be cool with any of these guys. And I think like I'd rather have most of these guys than Gabe Vincent or than Dalton or whatever. But I think they need a game changer to really be able to balance out their starting and closing group and compete with the Denver, Houston, San Antonio group in like a close game. That's my opinion. Madison notes that people will complain about her because the defense isn't at a level that you could ignore the scoring. That's fair. I think he'd get a certain shot quality in LA that he's never gotten in his career. And I think they'd also set him up with situations with cutting, getting out in transition. Like I think he'd get some easy buckets that if he's getting some of the looks that Jake, Marcus, and Vando are getting, I think he'd look better offensively, but certainly that's a limiting factor there. And then I see we have 3 more super chats, then I will wrap here. Tommen, thank you for the super chat. Misi for DK and pick swap. Pels equals fire sale. I think the Pels would want more than this. What's funny is the Lakers had wanted Misi, and that had been someone that they were considering for that spot had they not taken had Dalton not fallen to them. So I mean, there's an alternate universe where Dalton goes earlier, and LA potentially gets Jared McCain depending on the ripple effects of that. But LA either gets Misi or Tristan da Silva, and either one of those guys, I think, is much better players and much better fits for what LA needs. So I don't think that's enough for. I really like Misi, and I don't know if he's going to be a starting type, but especially for like a young, defensive-minded, efficient finishing big, I would value that if I'm New Orleans. Arnold, thank you for the super chat. That makes us with San Antonio and OKC. If not, don't leverage flexibility and cap. So I assume you're in general saying, like, if there's not a trade that puts them on the San Antonio OKC level, don't leverage flexibility and cap space. I agree. That's why I'm a bit reluctant in taking on longer term money. It just depends on the contract, depends on the context, the situation. But I don't believe in making a trade just to make a trade. At the same time, I think there's some clear holes in the back end of the roster that I think once you get into the Maxey Dalton range, I just think they should upgrade that part of the roster at a minimum. But I also think I've seen some fans buy into the fallacy of having the big cap space this summer. And there are some things you could do with trades with that flexibility. But if you think LA is just going to go out and add 3 impact players with cap space, I think you're buying does not really work the way that it used to. And it was funny because I saw someone reply to that on X, and they listed out all these transactions, and it was like, well, LeBron signed with the Lakers, and KD signed with the Warriors, KD signed with the Nets, Jalen Brunson signed with the Knicks, and there was a couple of other ones. And my first thought was, well, all those moves were pre-2022 or 2022 and older. It's different now. Guys don't move in free agency the same way that they used to at like the star level, and even at the sub-star level, it's a lot more in trades and signing trades or trades in season. So I think roster building is changing with the new CBA, and I think if you're holding out hope for LA to just sign all these dudes next summer, I think you're probably going to be disappointed. So I'm actually in favor of making a trade from that perspective of, like, if you trade for Andrew Wiggins, let's just say, you could also view it as like you have Wiggins for this year and you have Wiggins for one more year. It's almost like you signed Wiggins on a 1-year deal for next year based on like the current roster, cap sheet. So I don't know, but depends on a lot of things. But I'm with you in, like, I wouldn't take on a bunch of money or give up all your assets just because. I think it has to be a certain player. That's why, like, for example, I would not do a first for Keon Ellis or Ayo Dosunmu. I think that would be overpay for either one. Ryan Lucas, thank you for the super chat. Final one here. What about KP, Grant, Middleton, etc. for expirings? So I assume that's Kristaps Porzingis. That's a really interesting one, if he can stay healthy. I am not a big Grant or Middleton guy. I just ultimately think those guys aren't good enough defensively for what you want, and Grant still has a couple more years left. So I think you could always play them in smaller roles, but then I think it sort of defeats the purpose of, if you're trading for guys making 30 plus million and both those guys are in the mid 30s, you are it's just hard to build a proper roster if you have like those guys are not worth their contracts, and having negative value players in terms of their production versus their contract at that number, that's pretty hard to overcome from a roster. Like those guys are making double the amount as Rui, and I think Grant's been better than Rui this year, and but is he worth double the money as Rui? That's where I don't fully agree with that. So KP is an interesting one, depending on what happens with Atlanta, especially. I don't see them necessarily sending him back to Dallas, but if there was a way to get KP, I do like that with him in like he probably has to be load managed and play have certain restrictions, but if he could stay healthy, now I don't know if Luka would be on board with that with their history. I know that they got a little bit of a complicated history, but that's an interesting one. But yeah, I mean, in terms of longer term salary, I would be more okay with it if it's a player like Wiggins. I think is a totally like much better than these guys, and also like young enough to kind of fit that. Grant and Middleton are a bit older, have been on the decline, and I don't love paying those guys mid-30s. I think in the new CBA that is like people are bitching about potentially paying Austin $40 million, but like, would you want to pay Jeremy Grant $35 million? Like there's more than a $5 million difference between those two guys, right? Like that's just, I think it's a little bit too much, but with all that said, I'm going to wrap here. Appreciate you guys. Ended up going nearly an hour 40 again. But that's what we do with the late night gang. I'll be back Friday I'll be back Friday for a new episode of Beyond the Block, my national show. And then also after Lakers Bucks, I will be at that game. And then I'll also be back tomorrow, technically 11 a.m. Pacific time for Lakers Collective. But shout out to the chat. Shout out to the late night gang. Again, we got merch on the way. Excited about that. But appreciate you guys. If you are tuned in and not yet subscribed, I don't know what you're doing. Please consider hitting that subscribe button. Also, drop a comment below. Make sure you like the video. And for those listening on audio, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. Appreciate you guys. Gonna try to get some rest, and I will be back tomorrow.